I'm going to go through the process of creating the gasket drawing from CAD Graphics AEDD 105. This is Unit 3A, and Unit 3A looks like this. It's a Briggs & Stratton small engine head gasket. We're going to draw this because it contains a number of tangencies. Now that we've gone through the process of generating tangencies using classical geometric construction techniques, so I'm going to go through those steps, and this is release 2012, which has a variation on the array command that's different than earlier releases. I'm going to AutoCAD. I'm going to start with the circle command. I'll be typing my commands and I'll just let you know what they are, but you can get these commands from the tabs or from the pull down menu or from the ribbon or anywhere you want. 5, 5 is the center of the arc of the circle. Let me zoom in so we can see it just a little bit better. 1.9 is the radius of the outside circle. I'm going to press enter to get the circle command back. Type in the @ symbol, which means last point entered, because that will allow me to draw a concentric circle by selecting the point I just selected, which is the center of the first circle. 1.5 is the inside. We'll zoom up a little bit now. I'm going to go back to the circle command. This time I'm going to track off the center, go to the left, 1.8. The 1.8 is the circular center line has a radius of 1.8, and that's the location of that tab on the end. It has a radius of 0.4. Now I'm going to go ahead and trim these things out as I'm going, just so that I can keep track and clean things up. Now I'm going to show you how to use temporary tracking to draw the arc for the intake valve in the upper part of this drawing. And that's what I'm doing right there, the 0.8 radius. And I know the center of that is 2.2 to the right of the center of the large circle. And the distance from here to here is 0.7. It's given right there because this is a symmetrical part. I'm going to work on just the top part here so that I can then mirror. Go back to AutoCAD. I'm going to draw a circle. I'm going to use temporary tracking. I'm going to hold down the shift key, right click, let go of the shift key, and pick temporary tracking point. Now I'm going to go near the circle, hover over the center, and move to the right. I'm going to type just 2.2 because I've got direct distance entry, which will allow me to track over 2.2 from that center and create a temporary track point, which is what that little cross is. Don't put your cursor on top of that cross because it'll go away. If it's visible, you can track up or down or at any other polar tracking setting if you have things set right. And now I'm going to type 0.7. Now that gives me a new location for the center of the 0.8 radius arc. Enter. Try this one more time. Temporary track. Pass over the circle. Hover over the center. Go to the right. 0.52. It gives me another little temporary tracking point. I move my cursor above it. I'm going to type 1.1. 0.4 is the radius of the arc up there. Enter to get the circle command. @ to get the center that I just picked. D for diameter. 0.35 for the diameter of that circle. Now I've got that upper area right here laid out and ready to go. Now I'm not using the arc command at all here. Most of the time circle is a better choice than arc, because unless you know the actual endpoints of the arc, it's not really possible to draw it. So we're going to draw circles as though we're using a compass. We'll go trim things back after we find tangency. Now I'd like to draw the straight line at the end of this gasket. To do that, I'm going to go and draw the line. I'll use temporary tracking one more time, this time by typing TT. Enter. I'm going to go and hover over the midpoint of that arc. If midpoint's not turned on, you've got to go down to the Object Snap button in the status bar, and then right click, pick midpoint, and turn it on. It's already on for me, so I'm just tracking off of it right now. Now I'm going to track that distance, 5.7, because that's the overall width of this. I get another tracking point. I'm going to go up 1 unit, then I'm going to go down and draw a 2-inch long line, because that line right here from that corner to this corner is 2 inches because the midpoint goes up 1. So I tracked off the midpoint of this arc. I went over 5.7, and then I went from there in my temporary tracking up 1 to get that corner, and then I drew a line that was 2 units down. Now I'm going to start drawing using the tangencies. So I'm going to back to the line command. I want to go from the end of this line, which is a running object snap, tangent to that circle. Well, I don't have a tangency there, and you got to be careful. The quadrant is not a tangency. If I go to the quadrant, I have a corner, not a tangency. In order to override that quadrant object snap, which again I turned on, shift, right click, Now I'm going to select tangent from the list that shows up. These are known as override object snaps. So now you can see I've got the tangent glyph for the tangent icon. Left click, it goes directly to a tangency on that circle. If I were now to draw a line from the center of that and made it perpendicular to this line, in order for that to be an actual tangency, it has to connect at a point that is 90 degrees to the tangency. I zoom in, things don't look too good until I type RE, stands for regen. Now everything goes back the way it belongs. So I have a perfect tangency created by AutoCAD. I'm going to erase that. I don't really need it. I was just demonstrating to you that it was in fact tangent. Now we've got the whole thing. Go back to the line command, shift right click. I want to draw a line that's tangent to this arc, shift right click, and also tangent to this arc. I'm getting what's called a deferred tangency because there are a couple of possibilities and it doesn't know which one until I make a selection. That's what the little dots mean. Left click, it goes right to a tangent point. Now you'll notice I am very close to that quadrant. If you mistakenly go to the quadrant, you will have inaccurate geometry. Instead of a smooth transition between that line and the arc, you're going to get a little bit of a corner. Now I'm going to draw a fillet that goes between that circle and that circle. I'm going to use the fillet command, letter F, bring up fillet. But by default, the radius is set to 0. So if I don't do anything, but just pick those, nothing will happen. Instead, I go back in the fillet command, type R for radius, because the R is capitalized in the radius option. Enter, type in the radius I want, which is 0.6. Now if I pick this circle and this circle, I get a 0.6 radius. Now before I do my mirroring, I'm going to trim out the part of this circle that I don't need by using the trim command, selecting the two tangent lines, eliminating the arc that I don't want, and now I'm ready to use the mirror command to create the geometry that's up here, down here. The mirror command, MI, I'm going to put a window around all the things that I want. That color that you're seeing, by the way, if it's not the traditional blue color, it's because of my software capturing, the video capturing device. So normally you're going to see a slightly different color, but it's going to work the same way, where my window is only going to pick things entirely inside it. So I didn't pick that line because it would give me 2 if I used the mirror command on it. And I didn't pick these circles for the same reason. Now I'm done selecting objects, so I'm going to right click, enter, or the space bar. Now I just need to pick any point that's on the symmetry line, and that means any one of a number of these points. I'm going to go to the center, and I'm just going to drag over till I get a tracking line that's horizontal. Left click, enter, because I do not want to erase the source objects. And now I've got the lower part of this. I'm going to draw another fillet with a radius of 0.4 and draw that between those two arcs. And now before I do any trimming, I'm going to select my cut lines. Here's a place where a lot of people would make a mistake. They would type the TR for trim and then just hit the enter key to select every line as a trim line. But you have so many lines here that if you do that, the chances of leaving behind some small segment of line to what you will ultimately snap when you don't intend to, creating an error in the geometry, it's a bad idea. So instead of doing that, instead of pressing enter and picking every line as a trim line, I'm going to go up and say let's trim to that arc, and that one. And if you notice, that gives me my transition all the way around to here. So now I can just drag a crossing window through here, get them everything at once, and clean it up. Go back in the trim command. Let's say trim between here and here. I can get rid of that. I can get rid of this. Now I'm almost done with my geometry. I have a hole that is 0.4 units to the right and set up right on the center line here. Let's go and draw a circle. I'll do my temporary tracking again. I'll track over here, 0.4. And then I'm going to track straight down, and I'm going to track straight down by 1.8 because that's the distance it is down to the center. So I'm going to go straight down 1.8, diameter 0.35. This hole, by the way, and that arc do not share a center. They don't. That arc is a tangency. That hole has a specific location. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to create a copy of this. There are a couple ways to do that. I could simply use the rotate command. Say, let's rotate this. And if you take a look, once I've selected the base point, and the base point in this case is going to be that center, and that'll rotate around that center. One of my options is copy. C for copy, type in 60 for a 60-degree rotation, that puts the bottom one in for me. Then I can go ahead and clean it up like that with the trim command. I can also, though, and it's going to be useful in any kind of drawing like this, go to my polar tracking, right click, and set it for 30. The problem is if that's all I do, and then I decide to draw another arc by tracking off of the center of the circle, I'm looking for a, you won't have this luxury. Let me change something so I can show you what the problem would be if I hadn't already. By default, track orthogonally only is set under the polar tracking tab, polar tracking dialog box. If that's the setting, and this is what it is by default, when you try to track off of a point, it will not track using anything other than 90 and 0. If you want to track using something else, you've got to right click on the polar tracking icon, go to the settings selection, and then change the radio button from orthogonally only to track using all polar angle settings. Because now I can track up at a 30-degree angle, type in the 1.8, which is the distance away that next arc is, put in the 0.4, go to my trim command, pick those two lines as trim lines, select those and get them out of the way. So now we're getting close to having all the geometry. Now I just turned the line weights on so you can see that this is an object line. I have a center line layer. It's going to allow me to draw a center line, but I also want to draw the circle right up here that's an object line. So what I'm going to do is to draw a circle. Again, I'm going to acquire that center, go off at an angle, 1.8, diameter 0.35. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to put it on the object layer. I've got my ribbon rolled back, which you can do with that little button right there. So now I'm going to go to the Home tab, find Layers, pause till the layer button opens, layer panel opens. So put that on the object layer. Now we're set to go. Now I'm going to draw a circle. This time I'm going to select the center, and then I'm going to select the center of that hole, because what I want to do is to create that crosshair right there. That crosshair right there is a short arc segment and a short segment that has to be the same size as the center marks I put on every other part of the drawing. So I'm going to draw a line that's not going to start right at the center. My start point for that line is going to be acquired by tracking off of the center, and I'm going to put 1 divided by 8. It's 1/8 of an inch. Now that's 0.125, 0.12 would be fine. And I'm going to drag it up through the center of that hole, and I'm going to draw my radial center line. Now I want my center mark to measure 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch, which means the distance from the intersection out to here is going to be a 1/16 of an inch. The gap I'm going to create is a 1/16 of an inch. So to do that, I'm going to draw two construction circles. One of them is going to have a radius of a 1/16 of an inch. The other one's going to have a radius of 1/8 of an inch, 2/16 of an inch. In other words, double what I just created. So what I want is that crosshair that's inside that circle. I want a gap between the circles, and then I want it to continue after that. I use the trim command, pick both circles, and I'm just going to clean up my center marks. I'm going to erase both of those. That's what I want for a crosshair. That is an arc. You can tell if I try to change it. That's a straight line. You can tell on that if I try to change it. You want a straight line and an arc combo, and I want that size to match the size of everything else I do. Just make it clear what that is. I'm going to go into the Dimension Style Manager by typing the letter D, and I'm going to just modify the existing style. I'm going to give it a name first. I'm going to modify that, and I'm modifying under Symbols and Arrows the center marks. I'm going to say Draw Extension Lines. See right over here what that means. If I have none, no center mark. Mark, just a little cross lines, and you get extension lines. But 0.09, which is the distance from where that thing crosses to the end of that crosshair, too big. I want that to be a 1/16 of an inch. Make it a 1/16, pick OK, pick Close, because now I can use the Dim Center command. I can get that under Annotate if I want. Under Annotate, I go over here to Dimensions, pick Center Mark, pick a center mark like that, and it gives me a crosshair. And that crosshair is now a 1/16 from here to here. The gap is a 1/16 from here to here, which means everything is consistent. Now what I need now is to take that repeatable pattern. And this is something you want to look for anytime you create anything in a CAD system. That repeatable pattern consists of the hole, the crosshair, the arc going to the next line, and the radial center line. So what I'm going to do is to cut that arc so it ends in the same location on this feature as it does on this feature. In other words, I'm going to take and draw my circle again and give it a radius of 1/8 of an inch so that I can come in and trim at the circle that big arc. I'm going to pick those two things and erase them. Now what I have is a repeatable pattern. Now here's the change in 2012. The array command no longer has a dialog box, and it creates an array object, so it behaves a little differently. It also has an additional option, so when I select all my objects in the array command, I'm going to have to do everything at the command line. When I'm done selecting objects, I press enter, and it asks me if I want a rectangular, a path, or a polar array. Now I want polar. Happens to be the default right now, but I have to type PO for polar if that's not the default. PA will give me path, which means I can array along any irregular line. So polar, the center of the array is going to be right there. Now it asks me how many I want, and there's a little glitch in this command that requires me to click back in the command line and type in my 5. The angle to fill, 240 degrees. I press enter, and now I have perfect center marks all the way around. I also have this thing I don't want. Because that's one object, I now have to use a command called explode. X is the alias. Explode it, then I can erase that arc. Now we're just about done here. I'm going to use the dimension center command, DCE, to add a center mark here, another one here, and I'm just pressing the space bar to repeat the command each time. And if you don't want to type DCE, go to annotate dimensions, and then under dimensions you're going to get the center mark right there. I have to get rid of stuff I don't want, and the things I don't want are those, oops, getting a little too much here. Those two lines right there, and those two lines right there. There's no circular feature in the direction of those lines, so you wouldn't put it there. And the last little thing is, if I take that line and then stretch it by grabbing the grip on the end and put it over here, not there, because then I'll have two lines that look like one. Go to the end of that short segment, hit the escape key, and now use a window to go around that little segment and delete it. Now you're all done with that gasket. The only thing left to do now is to go and set up a layout, just like we did on the geometric construction. So I'm going to go to the Layout tab. I'll right-click. I'm going to rename it just because. Called it GeoCon for Geometric Construction. Right-click again and go to Page Setup Manager. Under Page Setup Manager, I'm going to modify the page setup. And this one I'm going to put on A-Size Mechanical. So I have to search for it. There's A-Size Mechanical. Make sure it says letter as the paper size, and make sure it says monochrome as the plot style table. If the drawing's done in inches, the scale is always 1:1. Pick OK, close. Now it knows what plotter I'm going to use. It knows how big that sheet of paper is. That allows me to go and insert. I is the alias for the insert command. I have to browse because what I'm doing is inserting another drawing. I'm going to go to the R drive. On the R drive there is a folder that's got a lot of drawings and other things in it called General. A little too far. So there's my General folder. And what I'm looking for in this case is one of these title blocks. Now those of you in my class, this is Dan Abbott, and those of you in my class are going to use TA inch for anything drawn in inches that you want on A-size paper, and TA metric for anything drawn in millimeters. This one's drawn in inches, so I'm going to select it, open. You'll have a checkbox on insertion point. If you clear it and pick OK, the title block will come in exactly the right place. You notice it's inside the printable area. Now all I want to do is to take my viewport, put that on a layer, and I've got a layer that I've already created, but let me just show you what the characteristics are. If I go to the Layer Manager, I have a layer called Viewport that's yellow because it doesn't show up very well, but the key thing is over under Plot, this is known as a non-plot layer because I selected it and it put the little don't plot symbol on there. Now I'm going to grab my viewport. I'm going to go to the Home tab, go to Layers, bring the layer drop down, put on the VP layer. Now I can put that viewport, change the size a little bit so it fits okay. I'm going to make it active, move my gasket into the middle. But now, with this gasket, which is a part, I have to use a plot scale. So if you look at the bottom on the status bar, I'm going to select it, and instead of accepting 1.431821, which is not a plot scale, I'm going to go and pick 1:1, makes things a little bit smaller. Pick the padlock button, and then you just have to go in and add all the text to your title block and then submit it.